Welcome to the Center for Universal Oneness. We are an open, welcoming, spiritual community that supports all faith traditions and invites you to join us on your spiritual journey. We host different speakers each week to guide and inspire us. We are guided by universal principles of acceptance of all that is sacred, and we strive to live in the oneness of love. Please enjoy this presentation.
For our speaker today, we have Lily Sandberg, who has been here multiple times, I think. Lily, how many times is it?
I think this is my third, maybe my fourth.
Lily is a child of Unity and a recent graduate of Unity School. That's not what they call it these days, is it, Lily?
Nope, Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute.
I'll get that eventually. She has performed various functions within the Unity organization, including working with teens in years past. And she graduated in June and is taking somewhat of a break, other than speaking to us and other churches online and recorded. She is also working a full-time job. So she says this feels like a vacation to her after years and years of education. I'm sure many of us can identify with that. She is working for, Lily, what company is it?
Tempur-Pedic.
Tempur-Pedic. We all love those mattresses. Yeah. Anyway, her dream job, if she were to be offered it today, she says, would be to work as a chaplain with an organization such as Planned Parenthood, where she could work to join the spiritual and the medical, where it has so often been abused in the past. And we wish Lily the best in finding that line of work. It sounds like she would be an absolute natural and a huge success. Lily, we're going to have you talk today on anger. Is that correct? Would you like to start?
We're going to do a song first. I love online ministry because you can have some of the best new thought artists join you. So that was Faith Rivera. You probably, if you've been around Unity for a while, you know some of her other work, but that's one of her lesser known songs that I absolutely love. And today, my title is this little thing called anger, which I thought was a funny juxtaposition to this thing called life. And the song, which many of you may know, this thing called love. That's where we tend to go when we are spiritual people. We go to love, we go to peace, we go to compassion. But today I would like to bring us into a different venue of human expression, which is anger. And so I just want to do a little more of an introduction about myself. So my name is Lily. I did grow up in Unity, and I'm very blessed to have that as my underpin. I also was raised by a pack of social workers, and I'm very passionate about mental health. So today we'll be talking a little bit about anger and emotion and the brain all kind of coming together. I do live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was born and raised here and have come back, and that is on Tiwa territory. I think it's important to acknowledge the land that we are sitting on, of the native peoples that had land taken away from them. So I am positioned on Tiwa territory. If you are interested about what territory you are on, there are a few avenues that you can do that research. And I think anytime we are talking about where we are connecting from, our geographic place, it's important to remember that there was people before us and there will be people well after us. And so I am recently graduated. I added Reverend to my title this past June, which has been a lifelong goal of mine and has been an interesting bringing about of all the pieces of me that I knew and did not know to come to the forefront to be able to be a minister. And one of the pieces of ministry that is important for me is to be able to call out the things that make us uncomfortable so we can grow and learn from that discomfort. because anything that we have inside of us that triggers something as an emotion, like anger that we'll dive into, it has data, it has meaning, it points us in the direction of our truth. And I think there has been a want to not address it because it's hard and it's messy. But I think there is beauty, there is holiness, and there is so much growth for all of us as a collective in the messy and the uncomfortable. I was taught throughout ministerial school that you should always start with a joke or a story. And I really bucked that throughout ministerial school. I thought it was a little corny and I never really liked it. But I heard this joke that I would like to open with today. A married couple was eating dinner and the husband said to his wife, "I'm so sorry I yell at you when I get angry. You're the person on the other end all the time. How do you never get angry back at me?" She looks at him and said, "Well, whenever you get angry, I just go and clean the toilets." He looked at her and said, "What does that do?" And she said, "Well, I do it with your toothbrush, so that helps with my anger." It's so corny, but it was so funny. And it is one of those pieces that I think whenever we have some of those corny jokes that get brought up at the beginning of a sermon, they always have gems. You're never going to find a minister that just tells you a joke because it's funny. There will always be a greater meaning. So when we dive into the greater meaning, we see that when anger comes out, it has to get out somehow, whether that's by yelling or cleaning the toilet bowl. Anger sometimes comes out at the people that we love most. And we know that when we are in relationship with people and anger comes up, for us to maintain a healthy relationship, we must take ownership of our anger and the behavior that was accompanied by that anger. And so one of these pieces that I want to dive into today is tapping into a myth that I think can be held, that spiritual people are somehow more detached from their emotion, or that spiritual people don't feel angry. I would like to say some of our most spiritual people were pissed all the time. Jesus flipping the tables is a great example of anger. The Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh have anger as a central point in their writing because they know it's part of our human condition. And so because it's part of our human condition, we come back to our principles, that if we are made in the image and likeness of God, and if we have anger, anger is not bad, it is made from God. But I would like us to unlearn this idea that anger is negative and anger is bad, that anger having an expression is somehow going to lessen our spirituality. I don't think that serves us at all. And when I was going to the text, because I am bred in unity and I am academically raised in unity as a minister, when I was turning to our foundational texts from the Fillmores and from Emily Cady, anger hardly came up. And I'm curious about why, but I have some theories, because often when anger comes up, we go to our misuse of principles. That sometimes when anger comes up, we spiritually bypass. Oh, that's fine. I'll get over it. It's working out in God's will. Or we put some toxic positivity in the mix, that I don't actually feel anger. If you have never felt anger, please raise your hand. I would love to learn from you. I think it is one of those pieces that, because it's not in our writing, we may shy away from how to deal with it in a unity context. So if you're willing to, I'd like to dive into that together. When I was doing some research for this talk, this quote came up a few times about emotions. And it says, "Emotions are like children. You don't want them to drive the car, but you cannot lock them in the trunk." And isn't that true? You do not want them to drive the car, but you cannot lock them in the trunk. Emotions are pieces of our expression. Emotions are an important piece of our humanity, but we are not our emotions. And that's one of the pieces that I think is really important when we talk about the use of the power of our word, which is one of our 12 powers, power, which is found in the root of the tongue, as well as our fourth unity principle about denials and affirmations, that if we continue to say, I am angry versus I feel anger, we get stuck in anger. The power of the I am, whatever we hitch to that giddy up of I am, becomes our reality. We know this to be true. And so I am angry gets us stuck in anger. But I feel angry is a whole other ballgame of being able to not only identify our emotion, but not get caught there. Because I think that's one of the pieces of anger getting a bad rep is we get caught there. That for anger, we are either an exploder or a bring it inner. That we encapsulate or we explode. That those are the two pieces, that we stuff it in or we let it out. And neither of those things are bad. Anger is not bad. Our behavior that is attached to our anger can be unhealthy, can be damaging, can cause pain to other people and ourselves, but anger at its root is not bad. And I think there is a judgment in spiritual communities about anger. Because when we label something as bad or as negative, it shortchanges us from looking deeper. That if I am angry at you, I can just stay angry at you. I never have to do anything about why I was angry or any reconciliation with you after I got angry. It keeps us distant. And one of the pieces that I think is so interesting is when I looked in the Unity text, I wanted to find, like, what is this gem on anger that I can bring to these people, that I can bring to myself? The only piece I found was in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary when it's defining emotion. And it says that emotions are undisciplined and uncontrolled forces. It is found that for each bad emotion, there is a corresponding chemical change in the tissue of the body that is life-depressing and poisonous. Contrawise, every good emotion makes a life-promoting change. That if we're talking about emotion through a metaphysical lens and we are still categorizing as good and bad, I think we are doing a disservice, because emotions just are. We are the ones that feel the need to categorize as good or bad. We know that unity principles just are. They are not good or bad. Emotions are a piece of our humanity that just are. They are not good or bad. They can be expressed in unhealthy or healthy ways, but at their core, they just are. And anger just is. But when we look at the power of anger, I think there is a shift that we can make by seeing it in a neutral position, but as an active piece of who we can be. I believe that a modern day patron saint, especially for me as part of my pantheon of people who I read and absorb from, is Brene Brown. And in her book, Braving the Wilderness, she talks about anger. Brene Brown tells us that anger is a catalyst. Holding on to it will make us exhausted and sick. Internalizing anger will take away our joy and spirit. Externalizing anger will make us less effective in our attempts to create change and forge connection. It is an emotion that we need to transform into something life-giving. Courage, love, change, compassion, justice. Or sometimes anger can mask a far more difficult emotion, like grief, regret, or shame. And we need to use anger to dig into what we are really feeling. Either way, anger is a powerful catalyst, but it can be a life-sucking companion if you let it. And throughout this quote and throughout Brene Brown bringing in anger, I love the concept of anger being a catalyst. Because when we are feeling angry, It points us in the direction of what is not working, what is not in alignment with our truth, what is not alignment with our inherent goodness. It tells us that something is out of alignment in our internal reality, or that we've seen in our external reality. Anger is what's called a secondary emotion. And so what that means is something else, another emotion comes first. And that could be shame, that could be fear, that could be helplessness, that could be powerlessness, that could be scarcity, that could be feeling out of control or feeling vulnerable. That those are the emotions that are primary, that come first. And then anger comes after as the secondary emotion. Because when I'm feeling fear, it's really easy to just get angry and not address my fear. That if I am feeling out of control as my primary emotion, and then anger steps in as my secondary, that's so much easier to hang my hat on than dealing with my beliefs of scarcity. Anger is a very effective barrier for us looking deeper. Because my question to you is, when anger comes up for you, what is the primary emotion you feel most often? Because we all have that stuff we're working on. That's why we're here. That's why we're part of a spiritual community asking these big questions. So when anger comes up for you, what is the primary emotion that most often is partnered with it? I know for me, it is that feeling of control. That when I feel like there is no choice that I have, anger is the first thing that steps in to be my barrier from dealing with that. And that comes up every single time I get angry in some way, shape, or form. That when I really take a moment to say, anger is coming up, but what's underneath? It's something way bigger and way scarier that frankly, I don't want to touch. And that's why anger is here. That anger is a cue for us to get curious. Anger is a cue for us to say, whoa, 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 what's out of alignment here? But I will tell you that it is not always easy. Can helplessness produce anger? Absolutely. Helplessness is one of the primary emotions that I think is so powerful and strong. When I feel like I am helpless, that is a lack of scarcity, that is a lack of control, that is sometimes a lack of safety when helplessness comes up. And if that's your primary emotion, heck yeah, anger can come in. And it does a pretty good job. What we are sometimes taught with anger is to push it away, that we don't deal with it. But what I think strengthens us most in our spiritual practice is when we can use it as a tool to say, oh, what is there for me to learn here? Thich Nhat Hanh in Transforming Your Anger, which is a very good book if you haven't read it, says, you don't have to chase anger out of you. You allow it to be in you. You embrace it tenderly. And then your anger will subside and the danger is overcome. During the practice, you have helped anger and it will transform slowly. This practice enables you to acknowledge your anger with a smile. And I don't know how many of you, had this thought, but when I was reading this, if I acknowledged my anger with a smile, I think people would think I was delusional. I would get some quizzical looks if I was just smiling in anger. But that is the work, and that is the possibility that when we do not chase anger, when we do not push it away, Thich Nhat Hanh says we embrace it tenderly. We allow it to be in us. What a difference that makes when anger is not something we have to expel or push down, but it is something we can embrace tenderly. What power comes with that? There is a neuroscientist and author who I love and has come into my life in many, many ways, named Dan Siegel. And he has this exercise of explaining parts of our brain that I think is really effective. So if we have our fist up like this with our thumb tucked under, your wrist is your brainstem. And so your brainstem is basic bodily functions are controlled there. It's also your survival is your brainstem. And if you open your hand, your thumb is your amygdala. And your amygdala is the piece of your brain that holds emotion and is reactive. And so if you close your hand over your thumb again, these fingers in the front, these are your prefrontal cortex. This is the piece of logic and reason and wisdom. So what happens when you're angry, it is described by Dan Siegel. We flip our lid, and our amygdala and our brainstem are the drivers. That is our survival and our irrational emotional thinking. All of these things, our wisdom, our rationality, our logic in the prefrontal cortex are offline. And so our work is to figure out how we can be back to this. Because what happens when anger erupts and you flip your lid, it's something that physiologically we cannot control because we are humans. We are humans who were taught for centuries to survive, to look out for danger. And so when we are triggered in anger, we go back to our basic humanity of being driven by our brainstem, which is looking out for safety, and our amygdala, which is our irrational thought. How many people in that space of being taken over by the amygdala and the brainstem have said terrible things that have come out of your mouth in a space of anger? That there was no wisdom provided. Amen. Me too. That's what happens. Whether you like it or not, you cannot think your way using your wisdom and rationality in a space of anger. But what we can do is we can take that moment afterwards and we can bring our prefrontal cortex, our wisdom, our rationality, the best pieces of us back online. Anger animates the body. And so what happens is when we get angry, we can feel it in our body. When we feel angry, it could be in the pit of our stomach, like a pit of rage. I know for me, when I am holding anger, man, my shoulders are tense and my neck hurts. I know growing up in my household, I knew my mom was angry when her jaw was clenched. I knew that was like a full name kind of anger when I could see it, because our body tells us that anger is here. And because anger is an animating emotion in our body, we sometimes need to use our body to deal with our anger. So one of the pieces that I love is that anger, because it is a piece of our humanity, can also be utilized as that catalyst and can be released from our body, utilizing our body. One of the things that is frustrating for me at times is I feel like there's not always a practical thing. Like when I listen to a good sermon, when I hear a good TED Talk, like give me something to try, give me homework, give me something that I can do. And some of those pieces are not as available for everyone. And one of the pieces as part of my ministry is when we're talking about practical application, I want it to be as universal and possible for all of us, regardless of ability, regardless of belief system we are working within, regardless of time and resources. And so these are 3 ways that have been utilized in not only spirituality, but also our mental health system and our neuroscience that can support us through the process of anger, of bringing all the pieces back online after the lightning bolt of anger strikes. And so the first piece that I have found to be exceptionally helpful is name it, don't claim it. It comes back to that utilization of the power of our word, that when we have anger come up, I am feeling angry versus I am angry. The I am versus I am feeling. A well-known study found that when you name your emotions, it puts your physiological reactions on hold. So that combats that amygdala hijack and brings back that prefrontal cortex. But you have to name it. And if we're not familiar with what is happening in our body in order to name it, we can't easily move through this process. So expanding our emotional vocabulary, knowing that when my shoulders are tight, when my jaw is clenched, when I have that pit in my stomach, when I'm yelling, that is anger. To be able to name it, I'm feeling angry, and not sinking into the belief that I am anger and I'm angry. The other piece is being able to feel it fully in our body. Emily Cady was the only Unity author that I found that talked about anger, and she directly talked about it in regards of dis-ease in our body. That when we hold on to anger, it makes us sick. And being able to identify, where do I feel this in my body? What are the sensations that are coming up? I know for me, when I get angry, I look angry. I have the red face, the sweat. I am getting big. My voice is getting loud. But that is not always something that I have been able to figure out. And that's what it looks like for me. I know that in my partner, when anger comes up, it's the jaw clenched, it's the quiet. So what does anger look like for you? And are you willing to feel it fully when it comes up, to acknowledge it in your body? Because sometimes it's not easy. But just as nothing is easy when we start, the more you do it, the easier it gets. And so when we have named it, but we didn't claim it, and when we feel it fully, we don't want to hold on to this. Anger is not a good thing to hold on to. It's part of who we are, and we are ready to release. And so one of the things that I think is so great to utilize, that is accessible to all of us, that is our connection to spirit, is our breath. Have you ever seen a little kid get really mad? And they are standing there with their fists clenched and their shoulders up, and they're breathing. Do you know what that does? That actually helps us. The anger breath of breathing in and breathing out makes a difference, because it brings back that prefrontal cortex, that wisdom, that rationality. When we are breathing, and we are actively breathing, even if it is breathing in and out anger, it is helping us. And so sometimes what that means is you're not going to take those very peaceful, meditative, centering breaths in and out. If you can get there, rock on. But sometimes that might mean that you are anger little kid breathing. And that is still good too, and still a resource to utilize, because it does help regulate our body when anger is present. The other piece that I have found to be so helpful, and have utilized it a lot this week, is a tactic also using our hand. The ball of a fist is the universal sign for anger. And so being able to reclaim it in our spiritual toolbox is something that I have loved. And so what happens when you write a talk, I don't know if you know this, but if you talk about anger, man, I have had so many opportunities this past few weeks to deal with my own anger. And this has been one of the most effective things that I have found to do. So I invite you to hold your hand in a fist, however it's comfortable for you. And when you clench your hand and then release it, see how that feels. So clench and open, and clench and open. Okay, now we're going to practice a really easy denial and affirmation about anger. This anger has no power over me. So that's your denial. And your affirmation is, I release my anger and fill that space with curiosity. So I invite you to think of, it could be a big thing or a small thing, something in recent history that may have made you angry. It doesn't have to be big, explosive. It may be something you got over, maybe something you're sitting with, but just get something in your head. And we're going to try putting our denial with our clenched fist. This anger has no power over me. I release my anger and fill that space with curiosity. This anger has no power over me. I release my anger and fill this space with curiosity. So I invite you to just try that. Just give yourself a minute to really just feel how it feels. And if there is a more serving denial or affirmation about your specific instance, use that. But we're just going to give you a minute, take your own time and space, and just feel what that feels like to say those words and to have it in conjunction with your body.
Lily, you're muted.
Yep, I was doing my own practice, just like we all were.
Okay.
But how does that feel? How does that feel to link our tools of denials and affirmation with a physiological experience of relief? Because it's one of the things that I have found in this past week even to be really easy to utilize after I realize I am angry, to move through it with my body, to move through it with my spiritual tools, to utilize my power of the word. It is just one of those things that I've been like, dang, this is actually really handy. And it's not something that I couldn't do. I mean, I did it at my work desk. I did it driving my car. I did it, like in the bathroom after a rough conversation with someone. I think your spiritual tools that you can bring anywhere are good tools to utilize. So if this is one that works for you, I invite you to keep doing it. And if you're like, Lily, that did nothing for me, no worries. Take what you like, leave the rest. The thing about anger that I think we can shift is that it is not good or bad. It can be our ally. And when anger can be our ally, man, the world opens up. We come back to the concept of no one and nothing is against me. And if anger is my ally, not even my anger is against me. It is for my good, that I genuinely believe that an infinite, all-encompassing, all-wise spirit that is whatever word you call, I call God. God made us to feel our anger. It is here to be a data point for when we are out of alignment. And if we can shift how we are thinking about our anger into that way of thinking, that impacts how we can show up when anger shows up to impact our way of being. Because what is happening in our emotional world, in our internal experience, in our human expression, will always hold power over us until we learn to deal with it, until we pull it close, until we get curious, until we find tools that support us in moving through and not getting stuck in that process. And so my hope today is this little thing called anger is a little less prickly than when we started. Because for me, anger is an asset. Anger is an ally. Anger is a catalyst. And maybe that shifted for you too. But I would like to just take a few minutes, since we brought up anger and since it is a physiological, biological response, we're just going to take a few minutes to release anything that came up for us during this talk in a little bit of a meditation. And so what I always like to say before we jump into a meditation is, you know yourself best. And so if I say anything that does not work for you, disregard it. You get to take full ownership of your spiritual practice, of your meditation. And I invite you, anytime that there is a trigger or emotion or something that comes up, just breathe through it. Just come back to the breath. That there is no right or wrong way to meditate. So if you are fidgety and anxious, just come back to your breath. There is no wrong way to do this. But we are going to start just finding that rhythm of your breath. And if you are comfortable and want to close your eyes, I invite you to do so. If you feel better turning off your camera, you are welcome to do so. But just begin to find that rhythm of your breath, knowing that our breath is part of our spiritual tools, that each time we breathe in and breathe out, we are connected to an infinite well of spirit. And so with each inhale, we get a little deeper, and with each exhale, we go a little deeper. And as you are breathing, I invite you to just start from the top of your head and do a check-in. If there is any pain or tension or emotion you are ready to release, notice it and let it go. And so we start from our head and we go down to our shoulders, releasing any tension that may have built up. We move down our arms and through our hands. As we continue to breathe, we move down in our awareness to our chest, taking an extra moment to check in with our heart. We move down to our stomach and our hips. As we continue breathing, we do a check-in with our legs, down to our knees, and all the way through the bottoms of our feet. And if there was any place that had any pain or tension or emotion build up, we can move it through our body and through our feet, giving it back to Mother Earth. And if there is a spot in our body that feels like there is too much pain, too much emotion to fully release, we just surround it in white light, knowing that through awareness comes change. And so I invite you, when you're ready, to continue breathing at the rhythm that serves your body. But start to wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes. Come back to the place where you are when you are ready. Thanks for having me. It's really fun to get to talk with you all.